Hey everyone, Mark here from diabetesdietguide.com. Now I just wanted to do a video because we've been getting a lot of inquiries at work from patients who are worried, and also inquiries on my blog and my Facebook page with people with diabetes who are quite anxious, quite frankly, because they don't know what they should be doing. They don't know if they should be going back to work. They don't know if they should be going out for exercise. And a lot of them are actually just staying in their homes, trying to avoid catching COVID-19 or coronavirus. So they're stressed out, they're not feeling good. They're already having to stay in the houses anyway, which I imagine most of us are struggling with as it is. Then add a whole bunch of anxiety and stress on top of it. Plus the day-to-day of managing diabetes, I imagine it's becoming quite a lot. So I just wanted to do a video talking about hazard ratios and how this needs to be applied and interpreted to hopefully reduce some of that anxiety and stress and actually make you feel a little bit better about it. Now don't get me wrong, this video is not to replace government guidelines. I don't want you throwing caution to the wind after this, but hopefully it will just put these numbers that you've been reading in the media into context. So let's jump in. So the first thing to note with hazard ratios is that we have two measures. We have relative risk and we have absolute risk. So let's start with relative risk. So relative risk, we assign a number. So a hazard ratio of 1 means that you are no more likely for something to happen to you compared to the general population. If this number is below 1, then you're less likely for that incident to happen, or if it's above 1, then you're more likely for something to happen to you. So a hazard ratio of 2 means you're twice as likely compared to the general population for something to happen to you. If that number was 10, then it's 10 times more likely to happen to you. Now, if you're reading that one and it's 10 times more likely to happen to you, you could almost be like, oh my God, like that's quite risky. Now, let's actually just tie that in with the data published this week in the newspapers and in Diabetes UK, amongst other publications, which was looking at the risk of dying from COVID-19 and diabetes. And when we start breaking down the numbers, it seems like if you have type 1 diabetes, you have a 3.5 times increased chance of dying with COVID-19. And if you have type 2 diabetes, you have 2 times greater risk of dying with COVID-19. So I imagine if you suffer with either of these conditions, which if you're watching this video, you probably suffer with one, you might be thinking, oh my God, like this is scary. But we need to plug this into the other part of this, which is called the absolute risk. Now, we don't know how many people have COVID-19 in the UK. But the general assumption is that the death rate is hovering around 1% of people that contract it, probably less, but let's use 1% because it's an easy number to use and it makes the numbers much easier to interpret. Then the next thing we need to do is think about, let's assume everyone in the UK got affected. So we have a 1% death rate, which is probably less. And everyone in the UK, so there's about 65 million people in the UK. I think it's a little bit more, but let's use 65 million because it's a nice round number. So 1% of 65 million people works out at 650,000, which means the absolute risk of dying with COVID-19 as it stands is 1 in 650,000 people. So that's really low risk. It's very unlikely to happen to you. So even though these people might be 2 or 3.5 times more likely to have a death with COVID-19, actually it only increases the risk to 2 in 650,000 people, or 3.5 in 650,000 people. So imagine, actually just try and picture that, 650,000 people in a line, and you're only going to pick out 2, 3 or 4 people from that line. The chances of you being selected are highly unlikely. Okay, now don't get me wrong, if we're dealing with life and death and you are the person that gets selected, not good, but it's very unlikely. Now, I do appreciate that we need to take this one step further and then actually look at who these people are. Who are the 1 in 650,000 people? Because we know that there are riskier groups. So the majority of these people that are dying with COVID-19 or suffering complications are the higher risk groups compared to the low risk groups. So the high risk groups, for example, are people that are elderly, have underlying medical conditions, have a certain ethnicity, so we can see that Black, Middle Eastern and Asian people are having worse outcomes with this. Fitness level, lifestyle, diet, whole bunch of factors that feed into it, okay? So yeah, granted, if you have any of these factors, then the increased risk, the risk will probably go up, but it's still a low chance of it happening. Even in the highest risk groups, so which we know for people to be over 80, they're the highest risk, you've actually got the vast majority will be absolutely fine. So they say, I think it's a 1 in 5 chance of death once admitted to hospital if you're over 80. Now that's not great and that's pretty risky, but the other way to look at that is 4 people live. So actually the vast majority still live, and that's in the highest risk. Now, of course, if you're elderly with underlying health conditions and you come from a high risk ethnicity and you've been neglecting your fitness for the last 40 years and you smoke, yes, then the risk is starting to increase. Now, you can't do much about your age, you can't do much about your ethnicity. Some medical conditions you can't do much about, but lifestyle related ones like type 2 diabetes for most people, that's actually a modifiable risk factor. Type 1 diabetes, you can't do much about contracting it. That's probably not the right word, being diagnosed or having the autoimmune response that triggers type 1 diabetes. You can't do anything about that. And I know it's easy for me to say, because I don't have type 1 diabetes, but one thing you can do is control your blood glucose levels and what they are doing. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not looking for perfection, but within this data, there is a very big link towards how high your HbA1c is and then your outcomes. So it is very much blood glucose level driven. So someone with well-controlled glucose levels, actually the risk won't be as high as this. So keep in mind, this is an average. And we know that particularly in type 1 diabetes, I think the latest statistics from last year, around 33% of people fell into the target glucose for Public Health England or the NHS targets. So and that's the best it's ever been. So that's great, and people are doing really well, and it's not an easy condition to manage, but it does mean that 70% of people are above target. So their glucose levels are running high. So the average will be pulled up by those people. Hopefully that makes sense. So if you do have, but as I was saying, so you can't do a great deal about some of these, but medical conditions, yes, we can do the best with what we have, and some of these medical conditions will be avoidable or definitely delayable depending on what you're doing with your fitness, your diet, your lifestyle, particularly in type 2 diabetes. So I've said in a few videos now, if you're not already, this is the time to start looking at things. If you've been neglecting your lifestyle, start eating healthy, try and get as active as possible. If you have type 1 diabetes and you know you've been neglecting it a little bit, maybe it's time for a kick up the backside. Try and get those glucose levels down, because we can start to reduce this risk. Even though the absolute risk is still very low, it still means it's more risky. So if you did happen to find yourself in a hospital setting and you do happen to have a few risk factors, then we're starting to play with fire a little bit more. But again, it still means that the vast majority of people will be fine. So hopefully that just explains a little bit about hazard ratios, how to interpret them, and how to think about, hopefully just chill you out a little bit and not have everyone so stressed out, because it's already a stressful scenario. I know I'm stressed sitting at home quite often. I like get out and about, so I imagine most people are the same. Plus then you've got diabetes and other health conditions and all these things being published in the media. I can imagine that it's very anxious. If you do need help, check out the blog, diabetesdietguide.com. Bunch of free information on there. Type 1, type 2 diabetes, it's all covered. And essentially it's what I'm saying to patients day to day, and just listing it out, putting it all out there for you, and based on comments and questions I get. So I'm doing my best to try and help people. If you need a further helping hand, I offer consultancy and programs. Again, everything that I've been saying to patients over the years, I'm just putting it down into a course that you can tap into. At the moment, at the time of filming, we have a type 2 diabetes recovery plan. We're doing one for weight loss, and eventually probably one for type 1 diabetes and fitness. But that's for the future. But the idea is to reduce your HbA1c, which makes you less likely to develop long-term health complications, which means you can hopefully have a higher quality of life for longer in your life. So we're trying to reduce those complications, and that's what I do day to day to help people reduce those HbA1cs and lifestyle-related diseases, and later on in the future, hopefully help people with type 1 diabetes as well. But there's plenty of free information on the blog, so go check it out. So I'll leave it there because I feel like I'm rambling now, and stay safe, and we'll see you soon.